Hey, Shalom, Akim Shalom. First and foremost, as always, I want to give all praise, all honor, and all glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachakodash. I would like to give double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone that taught us his truth and that's still teaching his truth. And much peace, love, and salutations to the elect, beginning with 144,000 all the way down to the large multitude that believes and who the Lord will deliver in these last days. To you all we say Shalom. I'm the brother Tazamah from the Great Millstone Dallas camp, coming back today with another quick lesson, and I pray this lesson will be edifying and to the point. And I wanted to do a lesson on this article that you see here on the screen. This is from the peoplesvoice.tv. And the article reads, it says EC, which is short for European Commission, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. But it says EC Chief Ursula von der Leyen says EU can no longer rely on the US. All right, because we know that these different European Union nations, as well as a lot of these NATO nations, they rely upon America, all right, Babylon the Great, for funding when it comes to military defense. They rely upon them for defense, and we know that the European Union and NATO, make up this whole beast system, with America pretty much spearheading it. That's why America is known as the whore that rides upon the beast. All right, and according to prophecy, all right, eventually what's going to happen is that there's going to be there will be tension between these particular NATO and EU nations with America, and which is eventually going to lead to America becoming isolated and America not having any allies other than the state of Israel. All right, and when it's all said and done, all right, what's going to happen is that America is going to be isolated. The state of Israel is going to be isolated, and World War III commences. All right, America, it will be completely destroyed via ICBM thermonuclear missiles and fire from the chariots, as well as the state of Israel. But, the state of Israel will be built back up by the heathen, because that's going to be our headquarters. That's the homeland. Okay, but it has to be completely wiped clean from all the heathen that are amongst that region. Now, to back what I'm saying, and then I'll get to the article. Like I said, this is not going to be a long lesson at all. But just to back what we're saying here, all right, this is the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verse, I'm just going to get straight to the point here. This is verse 41. It says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. See that? And this the part of the statue that you read here, you had the head of gold, which is the Neo-Babylonian Empire. You had the breastplate of silver, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. You had the loins of brass, which was the Grecian Empire. You had the legs of iron, which was the Roman Empire. Then you had the feet of iron mixed with miry clay, which is the revival of the Roman Empire, which is what you see here today with NATO and the EU, spearheaded by America. But it says that what? It says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. All right, so there's going to be a division, right? It says, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. You see that the kingdom will be partly strong and partly broken before Yahweh Shai returns. Because remember, the rock that was cut out without hands out of the mountain, which that rock is Yahweh Shai, that the rock smites the image at the feet, letting you know where we're at in prophecy. Okay, it says, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. See that? So there will be a division. And remember, what did Yahweh Shai say? He said that a kingdom that's divided against itself cannot stand, or shall not stand. All right. So it says the bloc will have to focus on its own defense, according to the head of the European Commission. It says its president, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that the European Union must be prepared to take responsibility for its own defense, as the United States is stepping back from its security commitments. You see that? Because, with President Trump in office, there's been talks about how he was going to ultimately begin to defund the amount of funds that they're sending to these various different NATO and EU nations. And there's also been talks about America exiting NATO. You see, so what's this going to do? This is going to cause more strife and more. This is going to cause more strife and more problems, for lack of better words, between these particular EU nations and Babylon. It's going to cause them to look to others, you know, because you even have particular NATO nations, for example, like Turkey, which is a big one, which is I'm going to say which is one of the largest militaries in NATO, that's working alongside with Russia. You know, and the prophecy tells you that the mountains of Ararat, for example, it's in the book of Jeremiah, that the mountain. Matter of fact, let me just get it real quick. Ararat. Yep, Jeremiah 51:27. It says, set ye up a standard in the land, blow the trumpet among the nations, prepare the nations against her. And that against her is talking about America, if you can receive it in the spirit. Call together against her the kingdoms of Ararat, Mene, and Ashkenaz. See that, which is that whole reason of Armenia. You have Romania up in there. And then Ashkenaz is Germany. It says, appoint a captain against her. Cause the horses to come up as the rough caterpillars. And that captain that's going to be appointed against America, all right, is Russia. All right, that the chief prince. Okay, that's the captain. And you can read in Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, how Russia would be a guard unto these various different nations. It says, prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, which that's talking about the Russians, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. You see that? So you have these various nations who are NATO and EU nations, all right, that are making deals with the Russians. Let me type this in real quick. How many nations, how many NATO and EU nations are in league with Russia? There are currently no NATO or EU nations in formal league or alliance with Russia. It says, following the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, relations between Russia and let's see. The EU and Russia have historically had strong trade and energy ties, but the invasion of Ukraine has led to significant sanctions and a breakdown in relations. And a lot of these sanctions that have been placed are being forced by America. The EU has imposed sanctions on Russia, and Russia has retaliated with its own measure. So, you know, at one point there were, leagues between, the EU nations and Russia, particularly energy deals. But with these tensions between America and the EU becoming more prevalent, you're going to start having some of these, trades, for lack of better words, begin to happen again. All right. So let's go back. It says, her remarks signal that the bloc should strengthen its military capabilities amid growing tensions with U.S. President Donald Trump, which Donald Trump, we believe through the spirit, is that cruel Lord. Okay. It says the threat posed by Russia will not go away, and we know that the American focus will increasingly shift towards other regions. So there is no doubt peace in Europe requires that we take much greater responsibility for our own defense. You see that? So they're like, man, look, we don't need to no longer rely upon America we don't need to rely upon America for defense or for security, for financial backing. We need to worry about our own selves over here, right? Von der Leyen said in a speech at the European People's Party Congress in Valencia, Spain on Tuesday. It says in March, von der Leyen unveiled a plan to raise 800 billion euro, which is $910 billion, to rearm the EU. See that? As several member states look for ways to reduce reliance on U.S.-led security arrangements. You see that? So that this is part of Daniel, the 2nd chapter, as we read earlier, about the kingdom being partly strong and partly broken. It says Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor designate, said in February that Berlin must gradually achieve independence from the U.S. See that? So there's this notion going out there like, man, look, we need to separate from America, which is all through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. Remember the scripture says in Proverbs 21:1, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord, as the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. You see, so all this is happening due to the power and will of the Lord, man. It says French President Emmanuel Macron, who has long argued that the EU can no longer outsource its defense to Washington, has expressed openness to extending France's nuclear umbrella to cover Germany and other EU members. Trump has called on NATO members in Europe to contribute a fair share to collective defense. He has also refused to offer security guarantees to Ukraine or commit U.S. troops to a potential peacekeeping mission. Moscow has warned that the EU's military buildup will only escalate tensions. In an interview with TASS published on Tuesday, Nikolai Patrushev, a security advisor to President Vladimir Putin, accused Western countries of deploying their military machine against Russia and becoming delirious with nuclear apocalypse scenarios, because ultimately that's what it's all going to boil down to at the end of the day when it's all said and done. There will be a so-called nuclear apocalypse, which is written about in the scriptures, and there's various scriptures that you can pull that shows forth the coming nuclear apocalypse. Joel the third chapter, okay, Isaiah the 13th chapter, Jeremiah 50, Jeremiah 51, you know, Revelation 18 is the closing credits of America, you know, and that's the will of the Lord, man. Okay, it says Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov argued in March that the EU is willing to sacrifice its own economy only to achieve the ideological goal of defeating Russia. You see that? But what's going to happen is that you're going to have these, in the midst of World War III, you're going to have a lot of these nations turn on America, man. You see, you're going to have different areas in the world that are going to be hit by missiles, absolutely. But the place that's going to be ultimately destroyed, is going to be America. All right, let's end it off with this one. This is Revelation 17 and 16. All right, it says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire." You see that? These 10 horns are talking about these different EU nations, man. Eventually, they're going to turn on America, and they're going to shoot missiles at this place, man. Okay? So I just wanted to do a lesson on this real quick. I pray this lesson was edifying to the elect. Once again, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles, bishops, and elders, a great millstone that taught us his truth, and much peace, love, and salutation to the elect. Until next time, Lord willing, I say shalom.